some of the results that are coming in 24 hours after the election, and we're getting a sense of who might be winning, who is losing, and the reactions are already coming in. Tonight is not going to be about Ijoma Onyato and myself. It's going to be about what has happened, the thoughts of those players, those who are scientists who can make sense of the science of the election, and those who also played a part in the election, some of them who are not happy. We'll give you all of the insight tonight. Let me introduce to you.
Sorry, just before you give the insight, I'm just seeing this from our correspondent, Terry Kumi, saying that for Kogi, there are 2 local governments remaining, Lokoja and Ibaji, but collation has been suspended till tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Well, let's see whether he can tell us more. That's what we have.
That's a long wait.
For now.
That's going to be a long wait.
Indeed.
And they might not be able to have a governor-elect until tomorrow.
Yes, right.
Well, let's introduce our panelists tonight on the program to you. Professor Adele Jinadu is a professor of political science. He's here with us in the studio. It's good to see you, Prof.
Nice to be back with you.
Thank you. And now, Abuja studio, Mr. Festus Okoye is back with us tonight. He's the National Commissioner of INEC in charge of publicity and voter education. And side by side with him is Dr. Hamisu Abdulrahman. He's a political scientist. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for coming in tonight. Where do we begin from? Perhaps.
Thank you so much.
Begin with Prof, because Prof has been shaking his head since we opened the show. And you've been looking at all the drama unfolding, and you've just been shaking your head from one end to the other. Prof, what are your thoughts? Let's start with you.
Well, you know, I'm just worried that there are certain undercurrents which we may not really know. And the picture we are getting of something going on well and may be misleading. And I think, you know, so the important thing is not to focus as much on the outcomes as on the process that is leading to that outcome. So our concern should not be so much with the outcome as with the process of that outcome. And I'm really worried, you see, because in a way, the elections are competitive. You know, 2 unpopular governors, one belonging to the opposition party at the federal level, the other with the governing party. And you have so massive display of force, military force. And it really, you know, it's worrying. And in some sense, it's also heart-rending. But in spite of that, I think the fact that the process, you know, is being distorted is in fact a reflection of the competitiveness of party and electoral politics in this country. And what we should start thinking about is what do we need to do to advance the prospects for consolidating the progress we are making in terms of the competitiveness of the electoral process based on the progress that INEC has made. And that is very, very worrisome to me. And I think one major problem that I see, regardless of what the results are, one major problem I see is that we need to start paying more and more attention to the informal rules of the game, which may provide some confidence in that process.
What do you mean?
And what I mean by the informal rule of the game is that you will hardly see anywhere in the electoral law where people talk of the abuse of the power of incumbency to distort the electoral process. The other day I tried to look at it, and I discussed some lawyers. You will accept maybe code of conduct for public officers and so on and so forth. But that whole issue of the informal rules that you don't use the power of incumbency to distort the electoral process, because that is the most perverse form of electoral corruption. And that is very, very common.
Did you see it play out?
Of course, because it plays out.
Because
Even the symbolism of it.
For someone who have watched this process, you've consulted also for groups who are advocates of democratic values and development. And if you look at Bayelsa and Kogi, I always remind people that this is perhaps one of the most volatile places for conduct elections in Nigeria. If anything has happened in those two states in terms of skirmishes, in terms of misbehaviors of politicians, I would like to make a comparison between what happened 4 years ago and today, and what happened yesterday and today, in terms of if there is an improvement with voters and politicians. Did you see any kind of improvement?
Well, I mean, from what we have been hearing, I mean, election day was quote unquote peaceful.
In some areas, yes.
In some areas.
Yeah, in some areas. But
in
in some other areas, they have not been peaceful. But my point is that leading up to that, leading up to the election day itself, what was happening? And that is where the whole issue of the abuse of the power of incumbency, regardless of which party is in power, becomes important. And on election day itself, the deployment of security forces, who controls it, who does it, what instructions are they given, and what is the perception of their role in the whole process? So that is my point. And that is a major, major issue. For example, a day or two before the elections in Yenagoa, 10 billion something money was approved
in Kogi,
for example. And the perception, I was in Lokoja Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday before I came back to Lagos on Friday. The perception was that this was meant to mobilize and somehow provide money to bring in talks from neighboring states.
But I mean, in the real sense of it, this money has been requested for and given to other states. Those are some of the facts that are on the table. But the question is the timing and the morality of it. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, but it is also done it is not just in Kogi that it is done. The whole procurement process itself, building a war chest for elections, that whole process, we've not paid so much emphasis on it.
Sorry, I just want to bring in Mr. Okoye, sir. I know you're talking to Prof about that. The reason why I want to bring in Mr. Okoye in Abuja is because, yes, I want you to comment on the process today. This is the collation. But before that, can you clear up something that we're beginning to hear about some of the INEC staff being missing following the skirmishes that were happening in Kogi? It seems to be everywhere that some members of staff of INEC are missing. Can you tell us whether indeed all your staff are accounted for tonight as we're speaking to you, and if you are looking for anybody, etc., before you comment on the collation process today? Mr. Okoye.
Yes, we got that particular information, and the information was flagged by the electoral officer for that particular local government. And the moment that information came in, the chairman of the Independent National Electoral Commission got in touch with the Commissioner of Police, got in touch with the Department of State Services, and also got in touch with the other relevant security agencies. And also, on his own, he began to work the phones. He was able to speak to some of the ad hoc staff that were said to be missing. Apparently, what happened was that the polling units where some of these ad hoc staff were stationed and where they were working was attacked by gunmen, and some of them ran into the bush and decided to take cover in several places. And when the electoral officer did not see them after others returned, they were declared missing. But we have information and we are confident that all of them have now been accounted for. And the chairman spoke to some of them and assured them that the commission was very, very concerned. So as at now, all those ones who are missing have been accounted for, and we are happy to report that they have been accounted for. But it's really a very unfortunate situation because we are now getting to a stage where parents will be very, very reluctant releasing their sons and their daughters to go on this type of national assignment. If those who have volunteered willingly to go and serve their nation will be fighting for their lives on grounds of the fact that they volunteered as presiding officers and assistant presiding officers. So I think it's very, very unfortunate, and I think all of us should collectively as a nation condemn this type of situation.
Mr. Okoye, why I was talking about the collation, in the course of the exercise, when we began to look at incidences from those collation officers and the election officers, there are areas where they had to mention the smart card reader again. For instance, in Ayetoro, we're looking at Kogi now, Egbeda, Ega, RA, that's code 10. They said they started with it and it stopped working. They tried to make a complaint. There was no network, and that was how it ended. And you find that such people, they had about 365 voters there at that unit, disenfranchised. This is something we discussed in April, and I keep going back to April because I thought the idea of all the stakeholders meetings was for something to be done differently. What do you do when we continue to see this kind of thing that we saw yesterday again?
Now, we have a total of 2,548 polling units in Kogi State, and we have almost over 3,000 voting points. And the smart card readers were supplied to all these places. Now, we trained what we call RATEX, Registration Area Technical Assistants, who can respond speedily if there's any challenge with the smart card reader. So if we conducted the election in over 2,548 polling units and in over 3,000 voting points, and there was no challenge with the smart card reader, I think that INEC should be given a pass mark. But in all places where there were challenges with the smart card reader, we provided sufficient smart card readers, what we call redundancies or spare smart card readers, because this is off-cycle election. So we mopped up the smart card reader from the contiguous states. So there was no issue with the smart card reader. And our processes and procedures indicate that if we have challenge with the smart card reader anywhere, and if by 2 p.m. it has not been resolved, that the election has to be undermined, and then it will take place the following day. But we had our technical assistants who were moving from one polling unit to the other to make sure that there was no issue or no challenge with the smart card reader. So if in over 2,500 polling units and over 3,000 voting points, there was only challenge in one polling unit, I think that INEC should be given a pass mark and giving kudos for that. But that does not mean that we are happy that any individual has been disenfranchised. If any individual has been disenfranchised, our margin of lead principle and the way we manage the polling units indicates to the presiding officers what to do if we have what we call sustained malfunction of the smart card reader. So I think that it's just an isolated issue, and if it was not resolved, the presiding officer knows what to do in such circumstances.
Mr. Okoye, before we allow Dr. Amisu to coming into the conversation, there's been loads and loads of reactions. Let me begin with the coalition of civil society organizations and their reactions to this. And perhaps this is very disheartening. The conclusion of the statement and the report that was released earlier today, and I'm going to read it to you, Mr. Okoye, so that you can get a sense and react to it. It says that Situation Room is disappointed with the conduct of the two governorship elections that held in Kogi and Bayelsa State, and worries that the elections fall below the standards expected for a free, fair, and credible election. Take a listen also to what Yaga Africa also reported about the election, that says that they're asking for the cancellation of some of the elections, and which they said that the deployment and some of the logistic issues were a major problem. How do you react to this, Mr. Okoye?
Well, as far as the commission is concerned, we also have our own situation room, and we monitor the issue of deployment in all the local governments and in all the polling units. And from our own reports, in Bayelsa, 80% of all the polling units in Bayelsa opened before 10. And in Kogi State, over 90% of all the polling units opened before 10 a.m. this morning. So the issue of deployment was not really a big challenge. It was not a major issue. And up till now, we don't have any report of any individual who came to vote and could not vote on grounds of the fact that the polls opened at 10 o'clock or a few minutes after 10. So all those who presented themselves to the polling units and who wanted to vote went through the process of accreditation and were duly accredited, and they voted. Now, the issue of cancelling election results is a completely different ball game. Now, if, for instance, there is an overvoting in a particular polling unit, the law gives the presiding officer the right and the option to cancel the result for that particular polling unit and record such in Form EC 40G. If, for instance, we are unable to deploy on accounts of logistic challenges, the law and our procedures, our regulations and guidelines makes it mandatory that we must go back and conclude that particular election that has been undermined on grounds of the fact that we could not deploy. If there's resistance to the deployment of the smart card reader or resistance to the use of the smart card reader, our processes and procedures indicate that we should give that particular polling unit where there was resistance to the deployment of the smart card reader 0 vote, and we proceed as if all the voters in that particular polling unit have voted. If there is destruction of voting materials before the polls start, our procedures indicate that the results for the election in that particular polling unit should be undermined and can a supplementary election conducted at a particular time. Now, what I want to say is that in our electoral matrix, each polling unit is sovereign. Each polling unit stands on its own. So the fact that there was a problem in a particular polling unit in a particular area does not translate to the fact that there's a problem in a different polling unit. So you cannot, on grounds of the fact that there's a problem in one polling unit, cancel all the results in all the other polling units that are completely sovereign and that stand on their own. So each situation must be handled on its own. And it is the presiding officer of a particular polling unit that makes a determination on what has happened. And that determination must be in writing and submitted to the collation officer of the registration area, who will now also enter that particular incident in Form EC 8G for the registration area, and then it is cascaded to the local government, and then cascaded to the state collation collation officer, where the final determination is made relating to what is going to happen. Now, if you look at all the cancellations that has taken place,
perhaps
and they have the capacity.
Mr. Okoye, just apologies.
Yes.
Different reactions coming in. I'd like you to quickly just round up on some of these reactions. Listen to what the coalition of foreign observers and international community, they're saying. They are very displeased with what they call widespread of incidents of violence. And in fact, Yaga is saying that as a result of some of what has happened, that this exercise is far from the standard of what an election should be. That is the statement of Yaga for you. Let me put it straight to you, Mr. Okoye. You had 8 months between the general elections and the elections of yesterday. Is this the kind of election INEC was planning for? Was it the kind of result you were expecting?
Now, in the statement the commission issued yesterday, we condemned the use of violence and the threat of violence in some of the polling units and in these 2 states. But you must also realize the fact that the mandate of the commission, the mission of the commission, and the constitutional virus that has been given to the commission is to organize, undertake, and supervise elections. Now, the conduct of election and making sure that elections are free, fair, and transparent is a multi-stakeholder function. The commission does not have a police force. The commission does not have a standing army of its own. The commission must rely on the Interagency Consultative Committee on Election Security in order to provide a template for the provision of security at the polling units, at the inner cordon and the outer cordon of the polling units. But it is those who mobilize violence, those who trade on violence, and those who deploy violence for the purposes of election that we should be addressing, and not the commission. As far as the commission is concerned, we deployed all the non-sensitive materials on time, we deployed the sensitive materials, and we did everything that the law expects us to do. So we cannot be going up and down looking for political talks. So we should rather direct our attention to those who are mobilizing violence, who are mobilizing talks, and also who are deploying violence in order to undermine the electoral process. But the commission has done its best, and we are confident, and we are really, really appreciative of the sacrifices that has been made by the young men and women who went to the polling units to go and conduct this particular election.
Okay, Mr. Okoye, we will come back to you, but I would like to bring in Dr. Hamisu Abdulrahman. He's our political scientist on the panel tonight. But just to remind our viewers, those of you who might still be waiting to hear more from Kogi, that Collation has been suspended there till tomorrow, 9 a.m. The only two local government areas left are Lokoja and Ibaji. And I'm bringing up Kogi specifically so that I can talk to Dr. Abdulrahman. I don't know if you followed the process today, particularly for Kaba and Kaba Bunu area. It took such a long time for the returning officer or the collation officer to get himself together. He had to even go back and come back again. But we were still not, don't still understand the formula there, because looking at the accredited voters, he says 26,660, and then cancelled votes 22,293. When you look at the breakdown for all the different parties, you have APC with over 15,000 and then PDP 8,084. And some of us are still scratching our heads looking at the mathematics. As a political scientist, what does that tell you when you look at some of the results coming in today?
Well, thank you very much for that question. The problem with elections in Nigeria has always been the determination of the contestant, including the political parties as well as the voters, to return a particular candidate. Therefore, the mathematics that you see has to do with what the people want to do. Sometimes it is not even the fault of the presiding officer. At other times, again, the people themselves wanted a particular candidate. If the presiding officer did not do what they want before he leaves the scene, he could be killed in such circumstance. So at other times, again, the issue of corruption, abuse of process, abuse of the little power that we're given equally come to play. When you have somebody who is presiding and the person has an interest or he has been influenced by a group of persons, he could decide on his own to alter the process in such a way that it will favor a particular candidate. This is something that has been happening. We've witnessed elections in this country where the rejected votes are almost 1 million. Or that is the general election, and then we say they are rejected. At other times, it has to do with even the ignorance of the voters we've seen. So there are a lot of factors that can explain that. But again, abuse is always possible in some instances, but not always the case.